Have you ever noticed how some people achieve extraordinary success while staying completely under the radar, while others constantly announce their goals yet rarely accomplish them? I want you to imagine something for a moment. Imagine working silently on your greatest ambition, telling absolutely no one, and then one day, you've done it. That feeling of personal triumph, untainted by external validation or criticism, that's what we're exploring today. I'm going to share something that transformed my life and the lives of countless high achievers. It's a principle so counterintuitive yet so powerful that it might just change everything for you. Never tell people what you do. This isn't just about being secretive. This is about understanding a fundamental truth about human psychology and energy conservation. When you prematurely share your ambitions, you're actually sabotaging yourself in ways you might not realize. I've spent years studying this phenomenon, and what I've discovered might surprise you. Let me tell you a story. Years ago, I was completely transparent about my goals. I would tell everyone about my next big project, my ambitious plans, my dreams. I felt that sharing them made me accountable, that it somehow solidified my commitment. I was wrong. What I didn't understand then, but know with absolute certainty now, is that every time I shared my intentions, I was actually depleting the very energy I needed to accomplish them. Think about it. When you tell someone about your exciting new goal, what happens? They congratulate you, they express admiration, and in that moment, your brain experiences a small hit of dopamine. It feels good, right? That feeling of acknowledgement tricks your brain into thinking you've already accomplished something significant, when in reality, you haven't even started. You've experienced what psychologists call premature satisfaction, and it's killing your drive to actually do the work. I want you to understand something profound. Your intentions are like seeds. They need darkness and protection before they're ready to emerge into the light. When you expose them too early, they lose their potency. The energy that should be directed toward growth is instead expended on presentation, explanation, and often defense against skepticism. Consider this research finding. People who keep their intentions private are far more likely to follow through compared to those who announce them publicly. This contradicts conventional wisdom, doesn't it? We've been told to put it out there, to speak it into existence, but the reality is much more nuanced and, frankly, much more interesting. The most successful individuals I've studied share this trait. They work in silence. They understand the power of stealth. They grasp that true power lies not in appearing successful, but in actually becoming successful. And there's a critical difference between the two. Let me be clear. I'm not suggesting you become a recluse or that you never share your achievements. Rather, I'm advocating for protecting your intentions during their vulnerable developmental stage. Share the harvest, not the seed. Share the victory, not the battle plan. When you tell people what you're going to do, you invite unnecessary opinions, judgments, and energies that can distract you from your path. Some will project their fears onto you. Others will offer uninformed advice. Many will unwittingly drain your enthusiasm with their well-meaning questions and concerns. And all of this happens before you've had the chance to fully develop your own relationship with your goal. I've observed a direct correlation between how much someone talks about their ambitions and how rarely they achieve them. The talkers are often stuck in a cycle of planning and announcing, without ever making substantial progress. Meanwhile, the quiet achievers are building, failing, learning, adjusting, and ultimately succeeding, all without the burden of external expectations or premature judgment. Think about the last time you shared a big goal with someone. How did it feel afterward? Did you notice a subtle decrease in your drive to pursue it? Did you find yourself more concerned with how your journey would be perceived rather than the journey itself? This is precisely the psychological trap I'm warning you about. Your creative energy is precious and finite. When you speak about your intentions, you're not just sharing information, You're diffusing energy that should be channeled into action. Words are powerful, yes, but they can become substitutes for action if we're not careful. I learned this lesson the hard way. For years, I was the person who talked endlessly about what I was going to accomplish. I had elaborate plans, compelling visions, and I shared them freely. I was convinced that articulating my goals was part of the manifestation process. But I noticed a pattern. The more I talked, the less I actually accomplished. It wasn't until I embraced the principle of private intention and public evidence that things began to shift for me. I stopped announcing my plans and started showing my results. The difference was remarkable. My productivity soared, my focus sharpened, and most surprisingly, my enjoyment of the process deepened. When you work in silence, you develop an intimate relationship with your ambition. You learn to rely on your internal compass rather than external validation. You become driven by personal standards rather than public perception. This is where true mastery begins. Consider the metaphor of a pressure cooker. When sealed properly, it creates an environment of intense transformation. But if you keep lifting the lid to show everyone what's cooking, you release the very pressure needed for change. Your dreams, your goals, your deepest ambitions. They need that contained pressure to transform from mere potential into tangible reality. This principle applies universally, whether you're starting a business, writing a book, transforming your health, or developing a skill. The physics of achievement remains constant. Energy contained creates pressure. Pressure properly directed creates transformation. I want to address a common misconception. Some might hear this advice and think, but doesn't sharing my goals make me accountable? Don't I need others to hold me to my word? This is a reasonable question, but it reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of true accountability. Genuine accountability isn't about external oversight. It's about internal integrity. It's about making a commitment to yourself that's so powerful, so non-negotiable, that external enforcement becomes unnecessary. When you develop this level of self-trust, you no longer need to leverage social pressure to follow through on your intentions. In fact, relying on others to hold you accountable often backfires. It subtly reinforces the belief that you can't trust yourself, that you need external monitoring to stay on track. This undermines the very self-reliance you need to develop for long-term success. Instead of announcing your intentions to create accountability, try this approach. Make private commitments and then honor them relentlessly. Each time you follow through on a promise you've made to yourself, you strengthen your internal accountability muscle. Over time, this creates a level of self-trust that's far more powerful than any external accountability system. Now let's explore another dimension of this principle, the protection of your creative energy from unnecessary opposition. When you announce your intentions prematurely, you invite forces of resistance before your idea has developed the strength to withstand them. Every meaningful endeavor faces opposition. That's natural and in many ways necessary for growth. But timing matters. There's a crucial difference between facing resistance when your idea is still a fragile seedling versus when it has developed strong roots and a sturdy trunk. By keeping your intentions private during their early stages, you create a protective greenhouse where they can develop resilience before facing the harsh elements of public opinion. This isn't about avoiding criticism indefinitely. It's about strategically timing when you expose your work to outside influences. I've noticed that many people rush to share their goals because they're seeking permission or validation. They want someone to tell them their idea is good, their ambition is worthy, their path is correct. But here's the uncomfortable truth. No one can give you that certainty. And more importantly, seeking it externally keeps you trapped in a cycle of dependency. True confidence doesn't come from external validation. It emerges from taking action despite uncertainty. It develops when you trust your own judgment enough to move forward without consensus. When you work in silence, you're forced to develop this internal validation system, which becomes one of your most valuable assets. Let me share an observation that might resonate with you. Have you noticed how the most prominent voices often belong to those with the least significant results? There's an inverse relationship between talking and doing that plays out across every field. Those who are genuinely immersed in the work simply don't have the time or the need to constantly tell others about it. This brings us to an important distinction: sharing versus selling. When you prematurely announce your intentions, you're essentially selling an unfinished product, both to others and to yourself. You're creating expectations that your nascent idea may not be ready to fulfill. This creates pressure that's not productive, but paralyzing. Instead, focus on sharing only what you've already accomplished. This grounds your communication in reality rather than speculation. It builds your reputation as someone who delivers rather than someone who merely promises. And most importantly, it preserves your creative energy for the actual work rather than the description of the work. I remember a period in my development when I became almost secretive about my projects, not out of paranoia, but out of respect for the creative process. I noticed that my ideas needed incubation, time to develop in the dark, protected from premature exposure. During this phase, I made more progress in 6 months than I had in the previous 3 years of openly discussing my plans. The pattern became clear. The less I talked about what I was going to do, the more I actually did. The correlation was undeniable, and it fundamentally changed my approach to achievement. Now, I'm not suggesting that silence is always the answer. There comes a time when sharing your work becomes necessary and beneficial. The key is timing. Share from a place of evidence, not mere intention. Share when your idea has developed enough strength to stand on its own, when it no longer needs constant protection and validation to survive. This brings us to an important question. How do you know when it's time to share? The answer lies in your motivation. Ask yourself, am I sharing this to get something or to give something? If you're seeking validation, reassurance, or praise, it's likely too soon. If you're genuinely offering value, solving a problem, or contributing to others, then your work might be ready for exposure. Another test is completion percentage. I've found that projects should be at least 70% complete before being shared widely. At this stage, they have enough substance to withstand scrutiny and enough flexibility to incorporate valuable feedback without losing their essential character. The principle of never tell people what you do extends beyond just work projects. It applies to personal development as well. When you're making significant changes in your life, whether it's adopting new habits, changing your mindset, or redefining your identity, these transformations benefit from privacy during their formative stages. Consider what happens when you tell someone you're embarking on a major personal change. Often they'll respond based on who you've been, not who you're becoming. Their perception of you is anchored in your past behavior, and their responses, however well-intentioned, may subtly reinforce your old identity rather than supporting your emerging one. By keeping your personal evolution private until it's substantially underway, you avoid this unconscious resistance. You give yourself the space to try new ways of being without the pressure of consistency with your publicly declared self. This freedom is invaluable for genuine transformation. I've observed this phenomenon repeatedly in the realm of habit change. Those who quietly implement new behaviors, allowing evidence to accumulate before announcing their intentions, tend to sustain these changes long term. Those who immediately broadcast their new resolutions often find their determination fading as quickly as the congratulatory responses roll in. This isn't to say that all support systems are counterproductive. There are specific circumstances where selective sharing with carefully chosen individuals can be beneficial. The key word here is selective. Choose confidants who understand the creative process, who won't drain your energy with excessive questioning, and who respect the vulnerability of nascent ideas. These rare individuals don't need constant updates to maintain their support. They don't require explanations when your direction shifts. They trust your process and provide encouragement without attachment to specific outcomes. Having one or two such people in your corner can be invaluable, but they are the exception to the general rule of privacy. For most of us, the path to extraordinary achievement is paved with quiet, consistent action rather than loud declarations. It's about falling in love with the process rather than the recognition. It's about finding fulfillment in the work itself rather than in others' perception of the work. When you embrace this approach, something remarkable happens. Your relationship with achievement itself transforms. You no longer pursue goals primarily for the validation they'll bring. Instead, you pursue them for the growth they'll require, for the person you'll become through the process of attainment. This shift is subtle but profound. It moves you from extrinsic to intrinsic motivation, from seeking approval to seeking mastery. And ironically, this internal focus often leads to greater external success than directly pursuing recognition ever could. I've noticed a particular quality in those who practice this principle of private achievement. They possess a quiet confidence that's distinctly different from the loud self-assurance of those constantly seeking validation. It's a groundedness that comes from knowing. This quiet confidence is magnetic. It draws opportunities, resources, and allies in a way that deliberate self-promotion rarely achieves. People are intuitively attracted to those who are genuinely immersed in their craft, who are more concerned with excellence than with appearance. Let's explore another dimension of this principle, the preservation of momentum. Every significant endeavor experiences phases of doubt, difficulty, and apparent stagnation. These are natural parts of the achievement cycle, not indications of failure. However, when you've publicly committed to a specific path or timeline, these inevitable phases become much more difficult to navigate. When others are watching and waiting for results, the normal ebbs in your process can feel like public failures. This creates pressure to demonstrate consistent progress, even during phases where recalibration or even temporary retreat might be the wisest move. By keeping your intentions private, you maintain the freedom to adjust your approach without the burden of external expectation. This freedom is invaluable because the path to significant achievement is rarely linear. It typically involves experimentation, course correction, and sometimes complete reinvention of your approach. When you haven't publicly committed to a specific method or timeline, you can make these adjustments based solely on what the work requires, not on how they'll be perceived. I remember a major project that took nearly 3 times longer than I initially anticipated. Had I announced my timeline publicly, I would have faced a difficult choice: rush to meet my stated deadline at the expense of quality, or publicly acknowledge the delay and deal with the associated loss of momentum and confidence. By keeping my process private, I was able to give the work exactly what it needed without these external pressures. This brings us to another benefit of working in silence: protection from premature scaling. When your early efforts attract attention and praise, there's a natural temptation to expand your operation before your foundation is solid. This premature scaling is one of the most common causes of failure across all fields of endeavor. By keeping your work private during its developmental stages, you remove this pressure to grow too quickly. You give yourself permission to stay small, to perfect your approach, to build systems that can eventually support expansion. When you do emerge, your offering has a level of refinement and durability that wouldn't have been possible with premature exposure. I want to address a concern that often arises when I share this philosophy, the fear of missed opportunities. Some worry that by not talking about their work, they'll miss connections, collaborations, or resources that could accelerate their progress. This is a reasonable consideration, but it reflects a misunderstanding of how valuable opportunities typically arise. In my experience, the most significant opportunities don't come from broadcasting your intentions. They come from demonstrating your capabilities. They don't emerge from talking about what you might do. They emerge from showing what you've already done, even if on a small scale. When you focus on producing evidence rather than making announcements, you attract opportunities based on demonstrated ability rather than projected potential. These evidence-based opportunities tend to be far more aligned with your true capabilities and direction than those attracted by mere declarations of intent. This approach requires patience and faith in the process. It means accepting that meaningful achievement takes time and that there are no real shortcuts. It means trusting that if you focus on developing genuine value, the right opportunities will present themselves at the right time. This patience is countercultural in an era of instant gratification and personal branding. We're constantly encouraged to position ourselves, to create visibility, to ensure we're not overlooked in an overcrowded marketplace. While these concerns aren't entirely without merit, they reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of how enduring success is actually created. True success isn't built on perception, it's built on substance. It doesn't emerge from strategic positioning, it emerges from the consistent creation of value. When you focus primarily on developing exceptional capabilities and delivering meaningful results, positioning becomes almost unnecessary. Excellence speaks for itself in a way that no amount of self-promotion ever could. I've observed this reality play out repeatedly across various fields. Those who direct their energy toward becoming extraordinary at their craft rather than appearing extraordinary tend to create work that genuinely stands out. Their results speak with a volume and clarity that makes verbal amplification largely unnecessary. This isn't to suggest that all forms of sharing are counterproductive. There comes a point where communicating your work becomes an essential part of its impact. The key distinction is whether you're sharing from a place of evidence or merely intention, whether you're offering substance or just promises. When you've developed something of genuine value, sharing it isn't self-promotion, it's service. It's not about you, it's about the contribution your work can make. This shift in perspective transforms how you communicate about your endeavors and how that communication is received by others.